Our building is directly next to a condo, so they were very vocal.
91,000 people every day.
Every day. But I know how to follow the rules, and we're going to.
Because 51%, meaning that they control the decision-making ultimate at the end of the day. I've spent over 25 years dominating tech and now cannabis. Built 2 companies and sold them for more than $25 million. I know how to turn ideas into cash, but today, it isn't about me. It's about learning from those who've battled the odds and won. Blake Mensing didn't just transition from attorney to co-founding Firebrand, a game-changing retail store in Boston. He took on the regulators, he overcame denied permits, and launched against all odds. Today, Blake's here to break down what it takes to navigate compliance, marketing, and the future of cannabis retail in a market that's anything but easy.
I am Blake Mensing, and I like to describe myself as a recovering cannabis attorney. And what that means is that I used to practice cannabis law. I had my own cannabis law firm here in Massachusetts for about 6 years, help people navigate the local permit process, the state licensure process, and then paint within the lines of the regulations once they were actually open. And I didn't ever enjoy a moment of it. And frankly, talking to lawyers all day, every day is going to make anyone a less than happy person. So, but that's sort of the background and the way I look at the world. So through a regulatory lens, and because my main bread and butter, as a lawyer was getting people licensed, I came to the conclusion years ago, well, this is awfully silly. I should probably get some of those licenses for myself.
Yeah, I mean, if you know all the intricate details of what it takes to actually get a license launched, you can. It goes directly into that path of like, well, why don't I just do this myself?
Exactly. What I've learned since, getting on the operator side is that knowledge gets you only so far and has very little to do with running a company.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've been trial by fire, learning as I go. And, frankly, what keeps me up at night is what I don't know that I don't know.
Right.
But I approach all problems, through a sort of research and learning lens. Mm-hmm. I just keep reading and reading and reading and reading until I sort of figure out what resonates with me.
Do you lean on that background as an attorney, like having gone through law school, being like, this is research?
Definitely, yeah. It helps you absorb the correct information. I can cut through fluff really quickly and sort of... I have a very interesting memory. I always tell people, never use me as an alibi. I never know who was with me where. But if I read something, it's in my brain forevermore.
Wow.
Which is pretty helpful, obviously.
Yeah, that can be very good for the actual written word portion of it. So that brings me to where you are today, though. Like, you're at Firebrand. This is a company that was... How did that all come together? Firebrand is a dispensary?
Firebrand is a adult use retail store across the street from South Station in Boston. I am the co-founder and came up with the what I think is a unique corporate structure. We are unique because we have 4 majority social equity folks who are our owners in the 51% majority. And that was really a response to, I don't know, probably 40 or so meetings with some of my economic empowerment and social equity clients, basically being ammunition and a pitch for them to say, here's how we'll follow the rules, et cetera. And the pushback we got from investors consistently was, how do I put all my eggs in this unknown basket? So that was, a construct where it was one person who has the 51% majority. They call the shots and, the law says that's the construct. So it's a tough pill to swallow for an investor to say, I'm going to write you a 6 or 7 figure check and, just trust that this one person can do it.
Right. Well, because 51%, meaning that they control the decision-making ultimate at the end of the day. They could form and be like, hey, the 49% says this, 51% says this, and then they're just like, that's what we're doing. Correct.
So it was a hedge. The thought is too many cooks in the kitchen can slow things down, and we definitely are a little slower than the average because we have a truly democratic process. But my logic was, 6 people on our board are less likely to come to a consensus on a terrible business path, than one person who might just say it's my way or the highway.
Are there any investors on the board?
Yes. So we have myself and my co-founder as 2 permanent seats. The 4 social equity members rotate through the 3 seats that are reserved for them on a year cadence where they replace the other ones. They all get a turn on it. And then the investors get to vote pro rata to their equity percentage to appoint a board member.
So if an investor owns majority stake in the actual equity pool at least, then they have a bigger say because pro rata basically being prorated against like their equity stake.
So there's no our biggest investor owns 5%. So it's
under the 10%.
Correct. Yeah, I mean that was just how it worked out.
Right.
We had a certain amount of equity, that my co-founder and I thought, here's what we'll end up with. We're still in the range, but every time we raise money, it only comes out of us because the 51% is sacrosanct, and that will never change.
Right.
So,
that's why. So it just gets eaten away out of your share.
Correct.
So it's up to basically whatever you want to.
Correct.
And I think that's, but also to the regulations, 51% is a magical number for social equity.
Yes. So that entitles us, and we actually received part of the state's first social equity immediate needs grant. We'll be applying. There's actually a webinar today where they're going through the next round where we could be eligible to receive up to $500,000.
Right. I heard that one. So the original one was like 2.5 million. This one's 25 million?
Correct. So the first bit of funding was sort of
like a bridge. It was just like, hey, here's a little bit of money. Shut up.
It was like, we need to do something, so let's throw something out there. Yeah. So yeah, we got not the total amount we had asked for, but free money is free money, and it helped us. Essentially, we spent dollars on marketing that we would have had to spend, on rent if we hadn't gotten the grant. So yeah, we'll be applying for that next round. They did have a little bit of a quirk where, in order to be eligible for the full $500,000, you have to have $250,000 in the bank.
I heard that,
and it's like, I don't know how many startup cannabis companies just have that.
Equity also.
Yeah, social equity folks just have that.
Just $250,000 sitting in the bank account right now.
So we're working on trying to get the most we can for obvious reasons that money solves a lot of problems.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So when it comes to the store, you had mentioned that it's in downtown Boston.
Yes.
So you have an extra layer because I think isn't there a Boston So you've got the Cannabis Control Commission, which is Massachusetts statewide, but then there's also the Boston Cannabis Commission.
Correct. So the Boston Cannabis Board, as they call themselves,
BCB.
is its own licensing process. They have a pretty unique rule in that they make you go through the Office of Neighborhood Services, which is an office in the mayor's office, to conduct your official, state-required community outreach meeting. I think that's pretty clunky. And ultimately, 6 years into the cannabis industry, you still get the same arguments that you got at the beginning.
But how many residents are actually around? So you have a ton of butters, I'm sure.
We do.
All businesses, right?
We do. Our building is directly next to a condo, so they were very vocal. The irony here is not lost on me. The most, frankly, vicious opponent was a woman named Karen, who just really leaned into that. And she actually said to us, "Do you understand that we have enough money in this neighborhood that you'll never win?" And I'm just like, I don't know what you mean by that because I know how to follow the rules, and we're going to. And I'm not the kind of guy who does things extra. I'm going to follow the rules to a T. But they sort of want the world. And
right. But what was their big fear? Like there was just going to be junkies out front strung out, and
they blamed us for the existing problems in the neighborhood. We have drunks in the alley and people doing drugs in the alley. And my response to that is, our building doesn't have an alley. We don't have access to an alley, and I don't understand how you can lay at our doorstep, what is in the neighborhood already. Another argument that I couldn't help but laugh at was they said that we would negatively impact the air quality in the area. So I don't know if they were fearful of public consumption, but if you've been anywhere in Boston over the last 6 years, it's happening.
Yeah,
and the reality is those people are running a tiny, tiny risk. The worst that can happen is you get, what's equivalent to a parking ticket, and it's, $100 and they'll confiscate your weed.
Right.
So
well, that's because for like public consumption.
Public consumption, yeah.
That's what
it is.
So it's $100 ticket?
Yep.
All right, so everybody listening at home, $100, if you're out and about.
Risk it.
Yeah,
if you want.
Go for it if you want to, but it is $100 and a fine.
Right. And we do have signs up that remind, our patrons that, hey, public consumption is illegal, no loitering, all that kind of stuff. The neighbors want us to, I think, be a shadow of every customer and follow them around the neighborhood and make sure they don't do things that are wrong.
Go away.
And that's not feasible.
Yeah.
We did offer in our community outreach process to institute a friendly neighbor agreement where we'd have every customer sign on to basically not littering and not, smoking in public. What we asked for in return was, at least non-opposition or potentially support. We got none. We actually got a bunch of lies that I documented to the board where they said, we didn't inform them of certain things. And it's like, well, here's a copy of the notice. Here's a copy of the deed showing I sent it to that actual, apartment. Here's the slideshow from the, Zoom you participated in where you're talking in the chats that talked about the thing you say we didn't disclose.
So wait a second. So did you have to, just because I'm inside baseball here.
Sure.
I know about the process. I've gone through the process. The most abutters I've ever had, it was 14, I think. Mm-hmm. Did you have to send a notice to every single abutter?
We did.
In that condo?
It was quite expensive. So yeah, every property owner. So all the condos, there's a couple residential buildings within our required 300-foot radius. A lot of corporate-owned buildings just because it's office space. Obviously, we had to send a notice to South Station.
Did they respond? Like when you send a notice to South Station, who gets that notice?
I'm not sure. We did end up getting a letter of support from the South Station general manager.
Okay.
The reality is none of those comments should move the needle. It's in my mind, and again, I think of the world through a regulatory lens. It's a legal test, right? Are we in the zone, and can we meet the standards? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
The horror story I have from the city of Boston is that because of my background, because I'd gotten permits all across the state, I said, all right, I'm going to do our special permit hearing. They call it a conditional use permit, but it's sort of same thing. So I got up there, in the virtual hearing, said all the things that the law require, and they basically said, we don't like your face, you're denied. And then they luckily denied us without prejudice, which meant we could apply soon, not have to wait 2 years or a year, whatever the time limit would be. And we ended up hiring the former city council president of Boston City Council as our lawyer. He said all the same things because the law is the law, and they're like, "Yep, hey, welcome, great, approved."
Yeah, they saw a face that they liked,
and
basically.
I have a shortcoming where I say what the law says, and I don't bend the knee or kiss the ring, and politicians don't like that.
I'm very familiar with your stance on a lot of things like that.
That is my style.
And that's also partially why I wanted you here, because you obviously can be very outspoken. If that's the law, and that's what it is, right?
That's right.
But now you've launched. I mean, did you think it would take this long? I mean, how long did it even take from start to finish?
It took about 2.5 years from the date we conceived of and filed for the entity to opening day.
Mm-hmm. So you had to do a bunch of work up to that point just to get everybody on board with the idea, even for the structure, the democratic structure that you mentioned, and then it was 2.5 years later. Yes.
So part of the delay was what I just described, the initial denial of a permit. That had we appealed, we would have won, right? I met every legal standard, as evidenced by the fact that we were approved the next time unanimously. And the aforementioned Karen, they could have appealed our conditional use permit. They would have lost because you meet the test, you get the permit.
Right.
It wasn't complex. We also had a bunch of delays with the City of Boston's Inspectional Services Department, where it's another thing where sort of my lack of diplomacy, or frankly, I don't know how to suck up or kiss butt. I'm not good at that. Mm-hmm. I say, here's what's required, and I'm going to do that.
Right.
And it's just this sort of attitude of entitlement and sort of don't make us do our job kind of thing.
There's like building inspectors and stuff like
so the
that?
building department, they have plan examiners. I actually got screamed at by a plan examiner because he said we hadn't uploaded things. So I was in that office one day for about 3 hours, and a supervisor walks by and was like, he's like, "You're still here?" And I look kind of shell-shocked because I was biting my tongue. I had arguments, and I said what I just said. We were just accused of not having these documents. So he logs into the portal, and he's like, "They're all there." I'm like, I know. So it's just, and the other thing, my co-founder had the audacity to ask the electrical inspector, why would we need a permit for our display cabinets? All they do is plug in and it's, track LED lighting in the displays. He said, would I have to get a permit for a microwave? And then it became a game of, I don't like your attitude.
Yeah.
So they ghosted us on multiple scheduled inspections to the point where we actually had to pay, an after-hours inspection fee to get them to show up. Boston's Inspectional Services Department, not great.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
Exactly. So you met all the requirements, you got launched, and were there additional, you had mentioned a few, but were there additional provisions you had to offer to the city specifically? Or
No.
It's just like once you met the conditions, you were good to go?
So we don't have anything extra on our conditional use permit nor in our host community agreement. It's sort of plain vanilla. Mm-hmm. I do think the Boston Cannabis Board has heard enough times from neighbors that all subscribe to NIMBY, that the sky won't fall. And the reality is, we will play by the rules or else we can't play the game.
Right, exactly. So if you don't play by the rules, there's other consequences which you don't want to expose yourself to, obviously. So you're going to play by the rules.
100%.
And how many stores are in like kind of that area right now?
So we actually are on a little bit of an island. We don't have another store within a half a mile walking distance of us. So that is a city regulation that says half mile buffer between stores. Social equity companies have the ability to pierce that with a variance. This is very legally nerdy of me. Every single variance that the city of Boston has granted to someone to pierce that half mile buffer rule, in my view, was blatantly granted illegally and impermissibly. The reason is there's a statutory test that predates cannabis that says here's how you grant a variance. And I won't go through all the sort of spokes on the wheel, but the basics are: is there unique topography? Is there unique soil conditions? Is there a unique lot shape? And a city lot in Boston is going to be one of like 3 shapes, right? Square, triangle, pork chop lot. Like what's unique about it?
Right.
So yeah, there's a few stores that are clustered really close to one another. I think, there's been some legal challenges about that because, again, it's not about what the board thinks or wants or feels. It's about, does this project meet this statutory test? And if the answer is no, they don't have discretion to grant it, and yet they do.
Right.
The reality is the state law requires that there are 20% of the liquor licenses represented in adult use retail stores. So Boston is required by law to have something like 56 or 57 stores, and the half mile buffer rule, if you apply it literally, it doesn't fit in the map.
Right.
So that's their own issue down the road.
So nobody did that topography to like figure out like where all this is going to fit, because 57, even if it was 50, that means I guess there's 250 liquor stores or
whatever
permits.
Whatever that number represents.
It's like 5 times more.
Yeah.
So super interesting. So you can be up to 50, but they don't all fit with that buffer radius.
Correct.
And so therein lies the rub. But
right.
So as far as competitors go, like, do you see? Are there people entering in that area? Do you know of anything that's happening in that area?
So we've had 2 proposals that sort of cropped up pretty close to us. One was sort of kitty corner on the opposite block, and the other was actually led by a Chinese gentleman in the heart of Chinatown. I do know what it feels like to be yelled at via a translator by an 80-year-old Chinese gentleman who, said I'm horrible and I'm going to hell and I should be ashamed of myself. And, my opinion is if you don't like weed, don't buy it, and it won't impact you.
Right.
But yeah.
So now somebody's trying to put something in Chinatown even.
Well, they got the whole torches and pitchforks crowd. They didn't even
NIMBY.
get to a vote.
Yeah.
And that's partially owing to, some advocacy we did with some folks, not in power, but influential people in Chinatown. We said, if our flag is planted there, and we're not technically in Chinatown, if you take the half mile buffer from our address at Atlantic and Beach across the street from South Station, we knock out 90% of Chinatown. Wow. So it would have to be someone.
That variance.
Yeah, someone have to be a social equity company. While we had fierce opposition during our community outreach process from Chinatown, I think that argument that we gave them about we can be your buffer actually led to 0 Chinatown residents opposing us at the conditional use permit or the Boston Cannabis Board license hearing.
That makes a ton of sense because I think that's an argument that a lot of people make with even like 40B. Yep. Right. So you've got all these 40B housing projects that are coming up that are every town, even this town, Medway, they basically told the residents, they're like, well, if we accept this one, we kind of meet the requirements. We don't have to go through this process again. Right. But if we don't, then we have to accept the next 2 or 3 that are coming through because this one happens to be a larger one. Correct. So I could see that as that buffer being very valuable to Chinatown residents because they're just like, well, if we accept this one, then we won't get one of our own. Right.
The thing with, ordinances is they can always change. This past summer, there was a proposal to get rid of the half mile buffer rule. So, I wrote a public comment and essentially said, we've spent 2.5 years to get open. We're a social equity company. Are you really going to put some, limitlessly funded MSO directly across the street from us? Like, I have no sympathy for the people who are worried about, there's going to be a weed store on every corner and, society will collapse. It's just not true.
It's never proven itself.
And of course, we all know weed will be consumed whether it's legal or not. So why not tax and regulate it and have it tested?
Yeah. If there wasn't a weed store in Boston, it would still smell like that.
Yes. So yeah, we pushed back very forcefully. Our local city councilor for the ward we're in the Leather District, never supported us, but he was very anti, lifting of that half mile buffer rule. So we were temporarily aligned. Again, as I made clear, I'm not great at diplomacy, and therefore I don't talk well with politicians because I say what I mean and mean what I say and try not to be mean when I say it. And I think politicians will say anything they think you want to hear. And I don't do well with folks like that at all. I just...
Oh, wow. And so I guess since you have that buffer zone, so basically half a mile radius, I mean, half a mile walking distance is what you'd say. But do like, is the demographic of Cell Station or near Cell Station, across the street from Cell Station, is that different than, say, Ascend at TD Garden or the Cannabis in Financial District or where the zone is?
So this past summer, we opened in May. I'd say about 40 to 50% of our customers came into our store with luggage. So it's a transit hub, right? It's New England's busiest transportation hub. And we're certainly happy to serve those people who might be a one-off customer, who are just using it as a jumping off point to somewhere else. The goal, of course, is to get in enough eyeballs and ears of people who ride the commuter rail every day. Through that building every day, walks 91,000 plus people.
91,000 people
Correct.
Every day.
Go
through Cell Station.
So if you look at the rough sort of admitted cannabis consumers of Massachusetts, we're about 27% of the population that admits to consuming cannabis, at least every 30 days.
Self-reported.
Right. So, could be a little higher, could be a little lower. My guess it would be slightly lower. With the sort of professionals, maybe it's a little lower. But yeah, we are targeting our marketing on commuter rail communities that have retail bans. So, I live in Holliston. We don't have a commuter rail station, but the neighboring, Ashland does, and they're never going to allow retail. So the logic is, after work, pick it up and head home.
Yeah, just pick it up on your way home.
So that's what our target is.
People travel. I was just looking at our QR code statistics the other day because, as we release new product lines and stuff like that, we create our own separate SKU for each one so we can track them independently. And we found that I think our second most popular city is New York City right now.
Cool.
And the fifth one is Ashburnham, Virginia or something like that.
Interesting.
Or Ashburn, Virginia or something crazy like that. So it's just one of the situations where people will hop on a train, because those are definitely on train routes.
Yep.
And then just take it home with them, because we're in a few stores around there, of course. So what, I guess, when you're looking at the surrounding stores, are you checking out their menus and seeing all their pricing things?
Pricing in particular, we don't want to be an extreme outlier one way or the other. We have, I think, a pretty broad menu in terms of some value-based plays, some mid-range stuff, and some high-end. And I think, the average commuter probably has a little more walking around money than say, a store maybe in, a not great part of Worcester. But yeah, I think we haven't even quite yet scratched the surface on that commuter sort of flow. We've done, the very old-fashioned marketing where we have a guy with a spinning sign that stands on the corner, right, to say, hey, we're right over there.
You have the spinny guy?
We sure do.
What is he holding?
He's got a big arrow that just says Firebrand Cannabis, and I think the language says less than 420 steps away, just to be,
Yeah. Well, then, 420 is one of those numbers that once you put the number 420 in something, people immediately think of it without having to say it.
Right.
Which is an extremely good marketing tool that we've employed ourselves. So I guess heading into the marketing side, and some of the stuff, I don't know, your specific role. Obviously, you can do all the compliance.
So I'm the CEO. I definitely look at anything we're going to put out in the world just to make sure it passes the regulatory test. My team is always saying, you're such a wet blanket. And the reality is I don't want to be, the poster child of a huge enforcement action.
Yeah. You could imagine that you might have a little bit of a target on your back from regulators.
I have been very critical throughout. Yeah. I think in a fair and justified way. Again, my guess is they don't appreciate the tone, but you're the government. I don't have to be polite to the government. Right. And I don't care if me being forceful and frankly knowing what I'm talking about offends someone who thinks they have a bunch of power.
Right.
So that kind of informs the dictionary definition of firebrand, right? It's someone who's willing to speak truth to power passionately, and I am.
Is that how the name came about?
Yeah. So our entity name is Stone's Throw Cannabis
LLC. I know
LLC.
It is Stone's Throw.
That's literally I could throw a stone and hit South Station. So the team just said they didn't love that name. I frankly think based on that location, we could have called it Weed Store.
Right.
I don't think the name is going to drive a customer one way or the other.
Bodega and New York City bodega style weed store. That's
exactly. Exactly.
People will buy it regardless.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, in the early days, I think there were a lot of people who built stores under the "if you build it, they will come" theory.
Yep.
And of course, the landscape of where you can put a retail store is dictated by every town's zoning. So, you got industrial parks that have cannabis stores.
Right.
Long term, I think that's going to be tough for those stores to survive. And we're not a store that seeks to get people driving to us, because frankly the parking there is terrible.
Yeah.
We want to meet the people who are already using South Station, where they are. So yeah, this was a coincidence. After we signed our lease, I learned of the South Station Air Rights project, which is finishing up in 2025. They're adding 1.98 million square feet to South Station, including luxury hotels, condos, retail, office, more restaurant space, as well as making, the bus and train terminals, much bigger and more modern and beautiful. And then since we opened, I learned that the new South Station entrance, the primary one, is about 300 feet from where our store sits. So it got even closer.
It got closer.
By chance.
And also this new developments. So that's fantastic. What about a courier service?
So we do actually have a pre-cert for a courier. Okay. We did the numbers, and it doesn't make money right now.
Can you courier with like a pedestrian courier, or do you have to?
Right now, the answer is no.
Okay, because I was thinking about that. Like, you just literally you have the vault already.
That's right.
Right. You have a person with a camera, and they just walk to the
So what we'd have to do is if there was a building across the street that had residences, or the one that's right next to us, we would have to bring it out of the store, put it in the vehicle, get out of the vehicle, and it makes literal no sense in an urban area like that.
Right. You have to. So there has to be a vehicle requirement, which means now you have to have a lease. And
Correct.
You have to outfit the whole thing.
Correct.
And you have to park it somewhere.
Correct. So yeah, we just ran the numbers and said that's going to be a tough sell. There are operational couriers in the city that we could partner with. We just haven't sort of bent over backwards to find it.
Delivery companies like a Zip Run and stuff like
that.
Yeah, but
they exist.
But is there couriers too?
I think there are a couple couriers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. Because they can swing by and pick it up, kind of thing.
Well, I mean,
and then just drop it off next door.
Correct. There's no geographic nexus required. So I could have a courier based out of Holyoke that if they wanted to park a car somewhere in Boston, that's kosher under the regulations.
Right.
So the regulations say that your commercial vehicle for courier purposes, it just has to be parkable where commercial vehicles are allowed to park.
It can't be overnight. You can't store product.
You can't store it overnight, right?
But other than that, but it doesn't have to store it overnight. You just have to park it there.
Correct.
Interesting. That might be a nice little hack there.
During our state inspection, the investigator walked into our vault and got wide-eyed, and he said, "I think you guys have the largest vault in the city of Boston."
I bet.
That was intentional. Yeah. That's the choke point in a retail store. Yeah. So yeah, we have a very spacious vault by design.
You've seen so many different licenses. You've seen so many stores be built. So you knew, vault was always an issue.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to drinks and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
Because I think that was probably our biggest uphill battle in the very beginning when we launched a few years ago, where people were like, well, we just don't have space.
Right.
They're like, and I remember going to one store, he opened a door, and I was like, but to walk in, and no, that's it.
That's the
it's
whole
a closet.
Thing. Right.
That's all I can store here. And I'm like, I get it. You can't take our product. I totally understand.
Yep.
Since we've moved on from drinks because of one of those reasons. But since then, anyways, we've moved on to tinctures and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But changing subjects a little bit, how do you feel about some of these new regulations that are being proposed right now, such as expanding the licenses from 3 to 6?
I think that is being spearheaded by groups that want to get as close to a monopoly as they can. I think it's a strange regulatory choice to limit it, but I'm also glad as a small operator, in the short term, that I don't have to compete with a chain of 60, 70, 80 retail stores, because their marketing budgets would be virtually unlimited, and it's just a lot harder to compete with.
It's virtually unlimited, yeah. So way harder to compete with. But I think to give maybe an example here, is it in Florida? I think doesn't True Leave have 160 stores in Florida?
They do. So True Leave was heavy on the lobbying when they created their original medical law, and I'm not a Florida attorney, but I paid attention. One of the rules on the books when medical arose in Florida was that to be eligible to apply for a license, you needed to have owned and operated a certain class of plant nursery for a certain, I think it was 30 years. So basically it limited the pool, to not a whole lot of people. And actually, I don't know this person or the husband, but the CEO of True Leaf's husband is in federal prison for bribing officials throughout that process.
Right. So you can only kind of go to the next. You can only make that logical step that there might have been something behind that.
Right.
Interesting. All right. And so as far as like Firebrand, obviously it's a long-term play here. What does the vision look like, I guess, a little bit?
Yep.
Like, where do you see yourselves in the next few years? Obviously, the new development coming up is going to be really impactful.
So that'll be helpful. Yeah, the goal is to just get commuters to bake us into their routines. If you consume cannabis and you're a professional that commutes through South Station, there is literally not a store closer to where you're going every day anyway. And if you happen to like cannabis, great, stock up. We're sort of a unique store in that our busiest days are Thursday and Friday, and Saturdays and Sundays are really slow because you don't have the commuters those days.
The city isn't as poppin' for the commuters at least.
Exactly. So we still get the tourists, and there's event-based things that happen, and we're working on getting in front of those eyeballs as well.
Is there a close event space there?
So we're pretty close to the Royale, which has had a bunch of cannabis events. So yeah, I think we're a little less than a half a mile from them. So it's less than a 10-minute walk. So yeah, the long-term plan with Firebrand is to grow organically, get our numbers up each month, and just have a good upward trajectory. I think the hope from the whole team is that some big company, maybe a big company that doesn't even exist yet or isn't in the game yet, sees that location as a must-have. And I think when a company thinks something's a must-have, they're going to pay more than if they're like, that'd be nice.
Yeah, there's definitely a premium on those types of stores. And so business is growing. So month over month, you're still seeing growth. It's fantastic. Are you anticipating any slowdown in the wintertime, or you're kind of resilient because it's commuters?
So I think the summers will be our slowest time because I think a lot of people work from home in the summers.
Or vacation, obviously.
Right, vacation eats into it. So yeah, I talked to one dispensary owner who also opened a store about a month after us, and he sort of said, I'm not really counting the summer. It's not going to be representative. So we're hoping it's not a huge swing one way or the other, and we want to obviously get to a baseline that's profitable and worth it.
So you're still edging towards profitability right now.
Yeah,
obviously, there's a lot of upfront startup costs.
Yeah, so we've got a rent payment that's hefty because it's prime real estate. We didn't get the sort of green tax in the sense that they didn't jack up the price per square foot. The way they got us is they forced us to rent the second floor in addition to the first floor.
Any plans for the second floor?
So right now we're using it as training space. A couple weekends ago we did a free bud tender training where we said anyone who wants to learn some skills come in and learn as much as you can. So we had Realm Garden Remedies come and sponsor that. We've got another one coming up in a couple weeks sponsored by PAX, where they're going to be doing a rolling class using hemp, which I think is pretty cool.
That's fun.
And we actually ended up hiring an attendee from that first session because she just, she had it. She wanted to be there, and you could tell. And obviously the bud tender is, that's basically your brand, right? It's who interacts with your customers. So
100%. Yeah, we love bud tenders. We're always promoting them however we can. And, including T-shirts and hoodies and giving them tons of swag. And fortunately, bud tenders love us, so that's not really a huge issue for us. But when it comes to Realm and PAX for these things, and also even in your store, I think I was talking to one of your co-founders about how you guys take advantage of that retail space as an additional source of revenue. Yeah,
so we have a pretty long string of display cases. I actually love this story. We got a quote for custom cabinetry from a company that specializes in dispensary build-outs.
Well, once you hear they specialize in dispensary build-outs, that's 3 times as much as
we knew. So the sticker shock we got for display cases, they said it would be between $85,000 and $130,000 to build boxes. Right. So we did not bite on that. That to me is absurd. So we ended up finding a jewelry store that was moving. So we bought 130 linear feet worth of display cases. We had them professionally refinished. All in, we were under 25,000.
Wow.
And I frankly, what cannabis consumer, what stoner walks into a store and is like, "Oh, I don't know, your display cases. I don't really." So they're perfectly presentable.
Nobody says that.
So yeah, what we do is we have a threshold in terms of monthly sales. If we exceed that for the month, we ask the brands to either give us $750 in cash or a product discount that's a little higher. I think most of them say the product discount because it's easier. So yeah, we honestly haven't sort of implement that all the way just as we get ramped up.
Yeah.
We also have a unique building facade where we're cut off at a 45-degree angle. So we have a bank of 2 floors of windows facing the one way that is Atlantic Avenue. So everyone who drives, comes off 90 sees that. So I view it as a sort of free permanent billboard.
Do you have, and obviously, like I said, I know obviously a lot of the regulations here. So what can you and can't you advertise on the
So we can't really have products,
right. You can't put a big pot leaf on the side.
No. We went real old school and had a 10-foot banner, that's got a little, sandbag base to stabilize it that said cannabis on it. I did some research, and the color combo of green background and white lettering that you see on highway signs is actually scientifically proven to be the most visible, even at night. So you'd think black and white would be the best contrast, but that, for whatever reason, makes it pop. We had that sign up on the corner of Atlantic and Beach for less than 24 hours before inspectional services showed up. And it was because the neighbors said, "We don't like this sign."
Right.
And it's like, okay. We were honestly rolling the dice with that.
Yeah.
I just thought we'd have a little more than
24 hours.
Yeah. So that now sits in our second floor space, and it's just it's not usable. But
well, that's the stuff that makes, I guess, any operator that's looking to get in the business or to optimize currently what they have, you have to find these little hacks, right?
Yep.
So you're like, let's roll the dice.
Right.
Let's put it out there. 24 hours later, it got pulled, but we tried,
Yeah.
right? And what did that cost you? Like $200?
Yeah, $150 for
Yeah.
the banner. And the sort of slap on the wrist that could have come if they had decided to literally enforce it would have been a couple $100 fine. And it's like, again, I'm not a rule breaker. Right. I'm not. I like following the rules. I've always been like that. I don't know why, but I like to paint within the lines. I guess partially so I can feel confident to give regulators hell when they're wrong. Exactly. And I'm like, I know the rules and I follow them.
Because you got no skeletons behind you. You've already followed everything to the T. Yeah.
That's right. I'm super proud of this. At both our provisional license inspection and final license inspection, we got through with 0 deficiencies. And that's unheard of. I will take credit for that. Our investigator was really working overtime, especially on the final license inspection, to nail us on something. And this is again why I get so worked up and why I can't lawyer anymore. They tried to make up a substantive rule in front of me.
On the spot.
Yeah. So what the regulations say is that you shall share your security plan with local law enforcement, period, end of sentence. And what our investigator said is the City of Boston's police department has to approve your security plan.
Not true.
So I did what annoying lawyers do, and I wrote, here's how a rule becomes a rule. Yeah. Here's the text of the rule. What you say is the rule is not the rule. And I use that annoying voice because I'm sure it was obnoxious. But I'm like, I'm not jumping when you say jump unless there's a rule. Right. So yeah, they were literally trying to hold us up, and they used what I consider to be a toddler argument. Well, other companies did it. They don't have me, and I read the rules, and I will follow it to the letter, but not an inch more.
It does not say that. So there's no approval.
Words matter, right? If the word approval was in there, I would have said sure.
Right.
So yeah, we invited the local police captain to a bunch of our inspections. They never showed up. They don't care. Like, cannabis is not a problem for the City of Boston's police.
We just did our alternative security plan in ASP for our production room because since our products have been selling so strongly, we're running out of space in our vault. Even though we built the vault around bottles, beverages, and we're just running out of space with these little tinctures now. That's how much we're selling. The thing is, we went to an alternative security plan to be able to allocate some space in our production room, a very specific space for our bulk product, basically. Something that's it's not even finished, it's still in process, which I don't think there's a rule against that anyways. We could probably do it today, but I wanted to go through, again, being above board, do everything the right way.
Over disclosure is the panacea, right? You can't get in trouble if you informed the commission of the thing you're going to do.
I actually just invited him. We have a new investigator now, Steven, I believe his name is.
Okay.
We just invited him in. We're like, hey, how's the ASP? Did it get approved?
Right.
But what I was getting to was our chief of police here came in, looked at it. 5 minutes, he was like, all right, we're good. Like, he was just like, yeah, totally, works fine, works fine. Like, you can totally store product there, no big deal.
Right.
Okay, great. Like, it was a 5-minute thing.
Yep.
And he almost wasn't bothered by it, but he was just like, checked off his list of his errands to do today from his wife. Kind of like, oh, we just did that, I'm just on my next thing, you know what I mean? Go back to the station. So, and obviously pushing back on what actually is a rule is definitely advisable for a lot of people who are entering the market or
100%.
going through that PFLI or whatever they're going through right now. You have to be able to, you have to know those regulations. And if your attorney is good enough, he'll be able to fight that on the spot. So you don't have to look like the bad guy.
Right.
Let your attorney
Right.
jump on that one. But
I mean, what I've seen, and I'm an odd duck in a few ways. What I've seen a lot of cannabis attorneys do is bend over backwards to be seen as cooperative. And I'm a friendly guy, and I'm willing to help, and I think of myself as a kind person. If what you're asking me to do, a client to do, isn't required and it costs a lot of money, then no, I'm not just going to appease you. Like, back to special permit hearings. Planning boards would say, I want this all landscaped, down the block because you're already doing it here. And it's like, that's not your money. And it's not a requirement.
Right.
And statements like, well, it would be really nice. It would be a good gesture. I'm like, this is business.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sending you a fruit basket for the holidays. Like, I don't want to be friends. Like, again, I'll be friendly, but don't ask me things that cost a lot of money just because you think, Yeah,
and so have you ever given up a point ever? Thinking back to all the licenses, have you ever given up something? Because I know how hard you are on these rules.
So, frankly, every HCA I help negotiate, I always told the client, this is probably not going to pass judicial scrutiny. Everyone that said 3%, no questions asked, every contract that said we agree it's reasonably related as an impact, and we also agree not to challenge it. None of that was kosher under the original statute.
But that was, so for your clients, you were kind of like, here's what it is. And then your clients were like, either they're okay with it or they weren't.
I told them what the law said, and I said, ultimately, it's a business decision.
It's your call.
Do you want to start this race with an HCA or do you want to not? And, some of them would say, I don't want this town because they're asking for the moon. I had one mayor of a city I won't name that, was going through the HCA with one of my clients and said, okay, the 3% community impact fee, blah, 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 you agree to that, plus a 1%, gross revenues to a transportation stabilization fund. And of course, I'm not one who can bite his tongue. And I said, yeah, that's not allowed. That's not permitted. That's not, kosher. Yeah. And the mayor looked me in the eye and literally said, I don't care. Everyone else has paid it.
Yeah.
I'm not everyone else.
We had that same discussion in an undisclosed town where the predecessors had paid a specific fee already, whether it was, and again, I love my police. I love the fire department. And I think it was the fire department got like $35,000, $50,000 worth of firefighting equipment. I'm like, awesome, I love it. And then the next person came in and they donated like $100,000.
Right.
Then the next company came in, it was like $200,000 worth of stuff every year that they were going to donate towards the town, above and beyond the 3%. Right. And then when it got to me, when I finally got in front of the town, they literally said to me like, well, in our HCA, it says that if somebody comes and negotiates a better deal, I then have to offer it to everybody else at that point. And I was like, so he was like, you have to come up with like $250 a year in just a raw donation or fee that is not attached to anything, just like money that you guys can use.
Because you exist, I want that money. Yeah, so that is why the new statute prohibits that explicitly. Right. You can't condition an HCA on any side agreement or a flat fee. And you certainly can't have a clause that says we're not going to challenge it. Obviously, now the commission has sort of a quasi-judicial role in weighing whether an impact fee is reasonably related.
What a bizarre situation we are in, and I think it stemmed from STEM a little bit in Haverhill,
Absolutely.
where I love the team over there. They sell tons of our product, but it's one of the situations where what is the... So basically, the HCAs are not retroactive. So whatever you signed 5 years ago is now actually the rule, according to this judge.
Up until you renew. And let me make again, a legally nerdy point. That was a Superior Court order on a motion for summary judgment. So everyone
what
has...
does that mean?
Sure. So everyone has heard of, case law being binding, right? You think of the Supreme Court of the United States. If they rule something, it's not optional. You have to follow that. At the Superior Court level in Massachusetts, that's our lowest court. So the law says, and this is longstanding, has nothing to do with cannabis, a final order of a Superior Court judge doesn't have any binding precedential effect. So even if that were a final order in the case, no other Superior Court judge in the entire state is obligated to follow that. It can be persuasive authority. They can say, oh, I see what that judge was saying, and they could follow it on their own, but it's entirely within their discretion. So a motion for summary judgment is something that happens in almost every piece of litigation. It has a timing-based, spot in the litigation. So after you've gone through discovery, and discovery is basically you put all the pieces of paper on the table and say, you show me yours, I'll show you ours. That's when the depositions happen. That's when all the facts are supposed to be laid out. What a motion for summary judgment stands for is assuming that everything is factually true, as you revealed in discovery, and looking at every fact in the light most favorable to the party not asking for the case to be done. Does the law say you win because of, you fit this box? So a motion for summary judgment is inherently hard to win. It is not a slam dunk ever. Right. So the reason the stem Haverhill order on the motion for summary judgment is not the law of the land is because of what I said about, it's not binding precedent. Right. And a motion for summary judgment, hearing is inherently fact specific. So what they ruled was that we can't decide based on the facts revealed today that this is a case that has to end. So all that means is there's at least one factual dispute that can't be, ironed out at that stage. Right. So I wasn't.
So nothing was determined then.
All it said is the case isn't over.
Right.
Right.
That's all it said. We're just punting this down the line because we cannot determine it today.
So I do know that KP Law, the biggest municipal firm in the state,
what their opinion is.
Their opinion is that that's binding.
Yeah.
That's a lie. Yeah. That's legal malpractice.
Right.
I don't play that, and I will say that to their faces. Like, did you tell your clients that everything I just went through? My guess is no.
No, I don't think, and a lot of towns aren't lawyers, so they don't know. Right. Of course, they have town counsel to interpret these things from KP, which they'll rely on. Yep. But we actually just got a letter from KP because we went for the waiver because they were like, the town basically says it's a bait and switch. Right. We were promised 3% from the state. We never got the 3% because we're a manufacturer. What impact? We don't have police officers flagging people in our parking lot. There's like 10 employees here.
So my response to that is, if you think it was a bait and switch, you're mad at the state legislature. If you think it was a bait and switch, you got crappy legal advice under the prior statute. Because again, I get lawyers speaking legalese. The original statutory text around a host community agreement was clear. It used regular words like shall and 3%. None of it was, obtuse legalese. You just read it like a frickin' human being, and you understand that cost incurred has to get documented. The document itself that of the cost becomes a public record, or else you can't collect it. Right. So, again, towns being mad at what state law is, I have no sympathy for that. Right.
But it's also not my fault.
Exactly. It's not your fault.
I'm in the middle of this.
And here's the thing. You couldn't abide by the terms of your contract when you go to renew. Yeah. The commission won't allow you to. Yeah. So it's not even about willingness. Will I pay, to just go along to get along? Even if I wanted to, you can't. Right. So
we submitted all of our documentation saying, the first year we were like, all right, this is what we're supposed to do. So we submitted all these things. The town basically didn't refuse, but they were just got busy and they just never sent us any statement on impact. So I don't know if that was KP Law being like, don't send them anything, or I don't know what happened.
If they said that was objectively horrible legal advice.
Well, I don't know what happened, but we never got anything back. And then the second year, we went back to them like, hey,
what are our impacts?
Or whatever, and they were like, we're not going to basically tell you. Right. And then our renewal is in 2025 for the HCA, but our CCC, our state license renewal, is up in January. So we actually just got opened to it because it's October now. And so I've been, for the last 2 months, even longer maybe, I've been going to the town like, hey, I don't have a compliant HCA. Right. And if I don't have a compliant HCA, then my renewal is not going to happen. And then I'm going to have to punt it down. And the CCC also has its own provisions to allow it to get punted. Right. But I don't want it to get punted. I want to get this resolved.
So what KP Law has argued in public comments to the state legislature and public comments to the Cannabis Control Commission, while the state law was being created and while the state regulations were being created, was basically that the CCC was overstepping its statutory authority. Right. Again, very legally nerdy, but an agency has power that's granted explicitly by statute that says you shall do X, or implicitly that says, it's a sort of a catch-all where it says you shall have the powers and rights to create all, rules, policies, procedures, processes to effectuate the whole statutory scheme. So there's one part of today's regulations on HCAs that I think is probably pretty ripe for a judge to strike down, and that is at the tail end of the administrative extension. Afforded to operational companies.
HCA extensions?
Correct. Okay. So when you apply for a renewal, and the CCC reviews an HCA that was signed before the new statute took effect, you're going to get a notice that goes to you in the town that says this contract doesn't comport with the new law, and they're supposed to sort of bullet point out what specific provisions offend the new regulatory and statutory rules. What it says in the regulations at the CCC level is that if you can't get to a compliant contract, you can use the equitable relief mechanism to say to the state, I need to stay in operations. So the CCC can grant you up to 320 days where you're supposed to be meeting in good faith, emphasis on good faith with the town to try to figure it out. At the end of that, if the operator and applicant can show, hey, we tried and they won't play ball, there's a mechanism that says the CCC can waive on their own initiative the HCA requirement.
Without the town even...
Correct. That, to me, steps on the toes of the statute, the original statute, which says every cannabis licensee shall have an HCA unless the town decides to waive it. Right. My opinion is that the waiver is the easy road for towns. Mm-hmm. I think towns should take a signal from the fact that the city of Boston, who, again, I've got my own issues with, they voluntarily gave back almost $3 million of community impact fees. If a municipality like Boston, that frankly thinks it's God's gift and can do no wrong, walks away from that amount of money, that tells me their law department was smart enough to say it's going to cost us more than that in the litigation it would take. Right. The STEM Haverhill litigation, again, with the motion for summary judgment, as the backdrop. What Haverhill did is they ascribed costs to STEM that were either supposed to be spread across all retailers. So, for instance, they got charged 6 times the amount to negotiate the first HCA as the others, because they basically used that as the model. Right. That's not fair. That's not reasonable. They also claimed that they needed to hire 2 full-time police officers for a state legal cannabis operation. That doesn't pass the laugh test. What are they policing? It's legal. Yeah. So why is that reasonably related? So that's where that fight is. That's why the motion for summary judgment wasn't granted, because there's so many fact-specific things where they have dueling experts saying it's real or not. Right. The reality is, I think the only operator in Haverhill that's still paying a community impact fee is the only social equity company, and that's STEM. And it's like, I don't know, wow. They're getting bad advice.
Yeah, I mean, because what I was getting to with my letter from the KP Law was they were granted the waiver begrudgingly, because the letter they sent was basically at the end it said, you have not been compliant in your responsibility to pay these impact fees since day one. And then, but here's your waiver. So they're kind of they have to have that in writing, just to be like, hey, we don't believe you're in compliance with the existing HCA, but we'll be fine signing this waiver for now, basically. So who knows what's going to happen? Does the CCC have the authority? Does the towns, all of a sudden, how are they fighting back with this?
The one point I want to make on it, even though I doubt the CCC's power to actually waive an HCA indefinitely without the town's participation, it's the law unless and until a judge strikes it down. Right. And unless and until a judge of a certain rank in the judicial hierarchy. Right. So a superior court would have to get appealed. That would get appealed up. And, it's not binding law until, an appeals court basically weighs in. Okay. So, the CCC is and has been a slow motion train wreck crashing into a dumpster fire. That is objectively true in my opinion.
Objectively true. I love it.
But they're bad at everything. Yeah. They have been. That doesn't mean their rules didn't follow the prescribed process for how you make a rule. Right. So a rule can be struck down by a court for a couple of reasons. One is you didn't follow the simple recipe of, publishing it, letting people comment. There's a cadence and a thing. It's a check the box exercise, right? They're obligated to accept comments. There's no obligation for them to do a damn thing in response to the comments. Right. We heard you. We don't like your ideas. Right. Or if the rule on its face fails a test called the arbitrary and capricious test. And that's, again, a judicial test that's legally nerdy, but it can be summed up as you don't have to know shit about shit to know that 1 + 1 does not equal purple banana, right? So if you have that level of absurdity, a judge can say, well, I don't know anything about the substance, but that's just wrong. Right. Is that like kind of like the laugh test you alluded to earlier? Yeah. Exactly. And I speak differently than a lot of attorneys. I do. But that's how I wrap my head around it. And something you said earlier, the municipal officials sort of relying on town council. I used to be a municipal attorney. I am confident that unless someone in a power position at the town level is an attorney and has municipal law experience, they don't know what they're talking about. And the reality is they have so many other sort of regulatory responsibilities on their plate that they can't know it all.
Well, there's a lot of things going on in towns, right? Whether it's something that the state is pushing down to the towns,
Right.
or the towns internally are they're having issues are coming up. There's a big project right now where, and this isn't really law related, but it's definitely like a public issue that a lot of people are raising, is our BESS, the battery energy storage system that's going in our town right now. It's been up for a year at this point, and people are still talking about it because now construction happens, so we can see it happen. So everybody's like, what is this thing that's happening all of a sudden? And then to be experts in everything all the time, it's asking a lot.
It is.
For a town.
And even as a municipal attorney, right, there's so many areas of law. When I was a municipal attorney, I was low man on the totem pole, and I got, put in charge of things as exciting as, I became the streets guy, right?
Sidewalks.
The blissful ignorance I had before that, like there's so much law underpinning every road you've ever driven on. It's not interesting. Yeah. I also had responsibility for our town's tax title takings, where, you fail to pay taxes, even if it's $25, the town can, by eminent domain, seize your property and then auction it off. Right. So there's a whole bunch of steps there. So
did it ever happen? Probably.
All the time.
Really?
All the time. And the land court, is way understaffed. So they're like 5 years behind. So it's a super long process. But,
right.
That brings to mind something else in relation to the community impact fee. Under the law, a tax and a fee are, mutually exclusive terms. You can't be both a tax and a fee. And the reason is, as we all know, taxes aren't optional, right? You don't get to say, I don't want to pay.
Right.
And if you don't pay, there's consequences like having your whole property taken by the government. A fee inherently, and there's a case, Emerson College versus City of Boston, that says a fee cannot ever be revenue generating. So it is always a choice. You pay the fee, you get the service. If you don't pay the fee, you don't get the service. The example I like to use is a sewer connection fee, right? You pay $1,000 or whatever the number would be to connect to the city sewer. Great, you're connected. Right. You don't pay it, you don't get the service.
That's not a tax.
Correct.
That's a fee.
Because you can choose to not get the service.
Exactly. So trash service then.
Correct. So that is exactly why the lawyers who told towns under the first statute that, 3% community impact fee. Any lawyer who advised their municipal clients to put that money into just a general fund and say, we can spend it however we want, that was horrible advice. Yeah. A fee can't make money for the town. So it has to be net zero.
Right.
I actually accidentally completely broke the city of Fall River by sending in one letter. They were charging a $50,000 HCA application fee. And so I'm a lawyer, and I talked about all the things, and I talked to their city solicitor and said, what is, how did you come to that number? He said, there's a lot involved. And I'm like, okay, even if you are a $500 an hour attorney, which you most certainly are not as a city attorney, there's not 100 hours. Like, no, that's not fair. And his argument was, again, toddler logic. Well, other companies paid it.
Right.
That doesn't make it legal.
Right, exactly.
So they wrote me a letter. This was probably 2 years ago in response that said, we didn't think our process is wrong. We don't think the fee's illegal, and we're going to work on it, and we'll try to get it up and running in 90 days.
Were there any? So there were some dispensaries, or at least operators in Fall River that did pay that fee.
And that's aside from, of course, their former mayor, who's now in federal prison for extorting cannabis operators, right? Yeah. That's a different ball of wax.
Wow, what a mess.
Yes.
Moving on from the subject, just because we gotta get on with our day here. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on here. I mean, I could literally spend so much more time on these subjects alone. But let's switch it to, I guess, more like personal kind of questions. Because I'm just curious in general. Like, we all have friends and family. They probably know you're in the industry. Are you like? How do you handle stigma? Do you still get faced with stigma occasionally? Or people, because you're so opinionated?
I have never sensed stigma, and I think it's maybe because people don't want to be on the receiving end of what I can drop on them. So if someone's judged me, I think they've kept it to themselves. And the reality is I would talk to anyone and explain, why they're wrong to their face. Like, I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
No, I even I've an almost 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. I sort of expected some parents to be weird. Everyone's always just kind of like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. I also have a very unsubtle license plate that says, Law 420. So it's like I'm not hiding it.
Yeah.
So I have not noticed any stigma. I've done a dab with my 77-year-old mother, right? So my parents don't care. They always preached moderation.
Right. I think that's smart as a parent, preaching moderation more than anything, because the kids are going to dabble, because I dabbled in a little bit of everything when I was a kid, you know what I mean? drinking and all that other stuff.
Sure.
And then, my dad would always tell me everything in moderation.
Yep.
So that's definitely a really good point. What about, for instance, we've talked a lot about, fees, impact fees, taxes, attorneys, and how the law works and stuff like that. What do you see as like the next big battle happening right now?
I think
what's on your mind as far as like what you think is the next thing that you potentially could help with, or that you just see as a big issue that you're not even going to touch?
Sure. I think there's a state level change that's coming and a federal level change that will impact us all. The federal side is that the DEA is working on rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. What Schedule 1 means under the Controlled Substances Act, which is a federal law, basically that if you're on that list, that's the naughtiest list you can be on. That's where Internal Revenue Code Section 280E rears its head and says, you can't take most standard business deductions, again, because you're naughty. Schedule 3 would be more like, Tylenol with codeine. So there'd be some level of federal regulation. It wouldn't be, a sort of fait accompli that pharmacy, the pharma folks would take over. I think there'd be some, enhanced compliance standards. Like you'd probably have to get your facility up to, GMP standards, maybe some ISO certifications, but that will ease a lot of the tax burden. And that it won't automatically make, banking a free for all in terms of availability anywhere. But I think that's the next big thing. The fact that the federal government is taking this step is the biggest step they've ever taken. So I know a lot of people in the advocacy community are saying, that's not enough. It should be descheduled. Right. The federal government's usually 10 to 15 years behind public sentiment. So it's like, we're getting there.
That seems kind of fast in that sense, because how long ago was the first adult use legalized?
Adult use was probably not till 2010 or 12.
Yeah, something like that. So 14 years. Yeah, there you go. So it's 15 years.
So it's starting. Right. So yeah, that will help the industry a lot. At the state level, I think, this has been the subject of discussion for years, and that is social consumption lounges, right? That was baked into the original statute, and here we are 6+ years later.
Well, it wasn't really written in a obvious, it was, the way it was written in the regulations was all over the place. And then on top of that, I think there was some pilot towns. There was like 6 pilot towns.
So they scrapped that. It was originally going to be 12 pilot municipalities. 5 opted in sort of day one. What the difficulty on that is there's a separate state law that governs, basically smoke-free workplaces for employees. It's nothing to do with the people who want. It's just the people who work there. Right. There's obviously,
ventilation systems.
Correct. Ventilation. So obviously you've got some, sort of, I call them a little bit gray area, places like the Summit Lounge. To me, as a risk-averse guy, that would make me too nervous, because it's literally a political choice of the Board of Health in that municipality to let that ride. Right. And the logic is, like an Elks Club or a VFW, if we're a private membership club, we can allow smoking. So that's, of course, what Summit Lounge does. But again, to me, having a politician be able to pull the rug out from you, even just when the board changes, it's like, I don't like that, because you couldn't sue your way into keeping that. Involved. Right.
And so, but do you think do you feel social consumption is like that panacea that people are making it out to be? Do you think it's even a viable business model?
I think there's some rules that make it really hard to be profitable. I think there's some rules that sort of guarantee that the people who attend a venue like that are going to be newbies, right? So there's consumption limits and purchase limits that are essentially below a joint. Right. So and there's also inside combustion restrictions. So I think, to be most profitable for a social consumption, you want an outdoor space where people can, smoke blunts, bongs, pipes. Vaporizing is not smoking, so it's a chemically different thing, right? So you can do dabs. But it's so limited. The other big thing, regulators like to talk about, public safety, public health as sort of get out of jail free cards. I said those words. That means, I'm just trying to protect people. Are you? So yeah, one of the rules is if you have cannabis at a social consumption lounge, you can't get a to-go bag. You have to consume there. So it's like, how does that jive with their goal of having fewer drugged drivers? I'm like. Right. So
you have to. So the person's going to be like, "Well, I don't want to waste this.
Correct. You're not going to throw it out.
Chug it right now,
or
inhale the entire amount and then hit the road because I paid $70 for this thing."
Exactly right. And how did you learn to consume cannabis, right? By consuming it with people who've done it longer than you have, right? So if someone's a big stoner, like I am, and wants to go to a social consumption lounge, and it's like, I'm not even high with what the limits I'm allowed to consume. Am I going to spend the money to go out? Like, no.
So that's such an interesting point, though, because what we're finding is, and of course, our products are 500 mgs, 1,000 milligrams, right? So it's like, how do you even there are some people, actually, I have been interviewing people just as surveying, customers of our own. And some people are like, they will drink an entire bottle. And I'm just like, that's amazing that you can do that. So maybe you're like, I could probably do that. I
would say that's too much. I don't honestly feel an edible or a tincture until I'm at about 25 milligrams. So the state regulation limiting us on the edible side to up to 5.5 milligrams. Yeah, that changed a little bit.
Yeah, well, the 10% variance, of course.
So I won't feel that.
Right.
That's not worth it to me.
Right.
And I frankly loved your seltzers, but I'm like, am I really going to drink 5 of these?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the things we are pushing for, is trying to figure out if we can double the limits on everything, including having 2 ounces potentially.
Most other states allow 10 milligrams per edible. And I get it, right? You can't uneat an edible, right? And I've gotten too high from edibles before. Prohibitionists love to talk about, there's an uptick in emergency room visits after legalization, to which I respond, great. Not one of those was medically necessary. It wasn't an emergency. Right. You felt like it was, but that's not the same thing. Like chemically and the way, THC operates in the body, it's not, a central nervous system depressant like alcohol or, opiates, right? You can't stop breathing from cannabis.
Right.
I read years ago that
I definitely smoked enough where I was like, I can't.
Right. But you're not in danger of perishing, right? So the old wives' tale that I've heard about is the lethal dose of THC would be the equivalent of a human consuming 1,500 pounds in 15 minutes, right? So Snoop Dogg and Willie Nelson can't do that, right? So no one's in danger of dying.
Soon. Very cool. So to wrap here, if you were to start all over again, would you do it?
I would definitely do things differently. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20. I'm not someone who regrets much, just because I try to be focused on the now and what I can do in small incremental steps. I don't know. It's been a baptism by fire. There's been a lot of stuff where I just think to myself, it shouldn't be this hard. The reality is, before cannabis, I never really had any fun working. I think part of that was working for other people. But I've been a stoner for 27 years. Ever since I tried my first blunt, I said, yeah, that's for me. I enjoy that. I've also had a pretty sort of heightened sense of what's right and just. And I ended up writing a paper my freshman year in a sociology course aptly titled Social Deviance. So I wrote it about, legalization of cannabis and sort of the prohibition around it. If you look back at the history, it wasn't made illegal because of any scientific or medical reason. It was made illegal because Nixon wanted to otherize, hippies and African-American people.
Right.
And you have his former drug czar on record saying, we couldn't make those people illegal, but we knew we could make the thing that they liked illegal.
So now stepping back to maybe when you were that age, what did you face that stigma back then? So when you submitted that paper, was your professor like,
no,
you can't
no.
what are you talking about?
I think he appreciated the approach because I definitely am a true believer and have, drank the Kool-Aid of I love weed. But just going back to the Controlled Substances Act, right? Schedule 1 says that a substance on it must have no recognized medical benefit and a high potential for abuse. So according to the federal government, weed is worse than heroin.
Right. I think heroin and weed are the only ones, or not only ones, but like the high opiates are Schedule 1. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they say it for sure, like cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug.
Right.
Right? That can kill you and does. Like it's just, so I don't like hypocrisy, and I certainly don't like it when, the law is blatantly hypocritical. There's a patent that the U.S. Health and Human Services holds on cannabinoids for neuroprotective properties, and out of the other side of their mouth, they're saying there's no recognized medical benefit.
Right.
So that is actually a huge ancillary benefit of switching from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and I think that will happen. That means our research can start in earnest.
Do you think there's going to be any interstate commerce at that point? Like, how do you see that unfolding?
It won't be immediate. I think it is inevitable. there's
because everybody's rules are a little bit different.
Yes.
You'd have to have these interstate treaties almost, or some kind of interstate agreements.
So that's an area of law that's its own complex ball of wax.
Yeah.
That can be something that can be changed very simply by the Congress, saying here's what the law says. I do know that the state of Oregon, because of their vast oversupply, they had a legislative fix that says the second interstate commerce is legal under federal law, we're going to be able to export.
Right.
So
they have a trigger on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's an automatic trigger once that law changes.
Fantastic.
So I think we're at the point, it's a when cannabis prohibition goes away, not an if anymore. And that's a huge change from even, 5 years ago. But I think we're a when now.
All right. Well, fantastic. Blake.
Excellent.
So much pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
This has been fantastic. I could have talked about this stuff all day.
I can talk about most anything all
Exactly.
day. So yeah.
And I love how you're such strong opinions and everything, because it's very clear in your head how it should be. And I love to hear that, because it's refreshing to hear sometimes, because I sometimes would be the opposite end of that, where I feel very much like, all right, I guess this is just what it is. And, we're just going to operate that way versus trying to that's not the way it's supposed to be done. And this is where we're going to
do it. Right. Yeah. Law is not always black and white, but when it is, I'm going to say it. Yeah. And, other lawyers want to give you the squishy mouthed, lawyer answer. And again, that's why I can't be a lawyer anymore. I just can't have these conversations where people try to, spit in my face and tell me it's raining. Right. Just not dealing with it.